Our fourth speaker is Pinaki Chaudhuri, my colleague at IMSC. So Pinaki did his undergraduate studies in Kolkata at the Presidency College, and then he was at IISc Bangalore. He spent for his PhD. He spent several years in Germany, in Dusseldorf, in France, at Lyon, at Montpellier, doing postdoctoral research. And for the past over 11 years or so, he has been my colleague at IMSC. His research interests include soft condensed matter and disordered systems, as you can see from the title of this talk. So disordered systems could mean many things, but here in this context, we should be thinking of things like glasses and gels and jammed materials of some kind. And he is really fascinated by how these kind of systems are formed, how they behave when you go and poke them and perturb them in various ways. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about that now.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for sticking around. It's 7 o'clock, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So I'll be talking about in a disordered world, and I asked ChatGPT, as all of us should do, that what do you understand by disordered world? And it says where chaos, unpredictability, and instability dominate. Well, the answer is true, but I hope that by the end of the talk, we will feel excited by the questions that confront us in the context of the disordered world. And maybe some of the young people over here will feel encouraged to venture into this world of research. So we live in a material world, and from the time that human civilization started, we have learned to adapt to the natural conditions, and also we have developed materials which have made our life easier. Okay? So material science is a very large and exciting area of research across the world, and we as physicists also contribute greatly to this endeavor. We try to understand natural phenomena, we try to explain and predict material properties, and we try to design new materials. Okay? So that is the context in which we are trying to understand about this disordered world. So in high school, we learned about the three phases of matter. Is it pointing? Okay, so there is the gas. So if you press your perfume at one corner, it spreads to everywhere. Around, it's a 3D space. Then you have the liquid, which you condense from the gas to the liquid. 1 second. So liquid, if you spill it, it will fill up the room. But in 2D space, it will not go to the 3 dimensions unless you do something to it. And then if you freeze the liquid, you will go to the solid. This is all we have learned in high school. And the solid will remain wherever it is, unless you kick it or do something to it. So it will not move. So the gas is spreading in all directions. Liquid will just spread on the surface, and the solid will remain where it is. So solid is rigid, it doesn't move, and that is the domain which we'll be interested in as we move on. Okay, so we heard in the talk, in the intermission, that about atoms and molecules. So there are different elements which make up compounds. And for example, one such compound that we know about is a combination of silicon and oxygen, and it is called silica. It's not, the alphabets are not showing up properly. And if you look at nature, silica is available in two kinds of forms. One is quartz, which is a crystal, and the other is obsidian. It's what is called an amorphous material, okay, or a glass. And this is a volcanic rock. So if you look at this image, sorry, this is terrible, but I'll just point to the finger. So in a crystal, what you have is an ordered structure of atoms, which are filling up the entire space. And then the difference between a crystal and a liquid is that it is a very disordered system. There is no order, spatial order that you can see in the liquid. And if you go to the glass, you have a similar kind of disordered structure in the atoms, except that the glass is as solid as a crystal. Okay? So then the question is, that is the puzzle of glass, and this is one of the unsolved problems in material science, that how do we get solids which have this kind of disordered atomic structure? Okay? And this is something that people have been trying to understand for several years and decades and so on. So we have made some progress. So in 2021, Giorgio Parisi got the Nobel Prize for providing some insight into how this puzzle of the existence of the glass is there. And so let me just read out the citation that was written in the Nobel citation. So for groundbreaking contributions to your understanding of complex systems, for the discovery of interplay of disorder and fluctuations in physical systems from atomic to planetary scales. So, and he got this prize along with these two other persons who were mainly from climate science, and he was being recognized for his contribution to the discovery of how disorder and fluctuations are relevant in whatever we understand. So then the Nobel citation extends to, so this is the text of the Nobel citation. So all complex systems consist of many different interacting parts. They have been studied by physicists for a couple of centuries and can be difficult to describe mathematically. So you can hear the word complex systems or phrase complex systems in different contexts. And this year's, and I'll give you examples of that, this year's laureates have all contributed to us gaining greater knowledge of such systems and their long-term development. So what are complex systems? Complex systems, in the citation itself it says, is a system composed of many components which may interact with each other. Examples of complex systems are Earth's global climate, organisms, human brain, infrastructure, such as power grid, transportation, communication systems, social and economic organizations, ecosystem, living sense. I mean, anything you can think of is almost a complex system, okay? And so if you look up on Wikipedia, it says, its behavior is intrinsically difficult to model because of dependencies, competitions, relationships, or other types of interactions between the parts or between a system and its environment. So for example, society is a complex system because you have lots of different individuals who are making up the society, and then you have people of different ethnicities, people of different religions who are interacting, and so that makes the whole social interactions very complex and so on. And this one can realize also in the material world, and this is what I'll try to explain as we proceed. Okay, so one feature of complex systems is there is this idea of frustration. So if I have this picture that I have one arrow down and one arrow up, I pay zero cost. So that is my assumption. This is the model that I'm giving you, okay? And if I have two arrows which are up, I pay some non-zero cost. So I pay 5 paise for that, okay? And so thanks to Rahul, who has been making these nice pictures. And so then we try to fill up space with this kind of arrows, these pictures of arrows. So if you have a square kind of motif, so here you have one down, one up. So this is satisfied, one up, one down, this is satisfied, and so on. So every edge is satisfied. But on the other hand, if you have a triangle, this is never satisfied. So you are always confused what to put in the third corner, okay? So this is what we call a frustrated system, that all the edges are not satisfied if I have this assumption of finite cost and zero cost and so on, okay? And then I can fill up the space, entire space. So if I have a square motif filling up this space, so there is zero total cost. On the other hand, if I have the triangular motif filling up space, at every point in this edge, there is some dissatisfaction, so there is a non-zero total cost. On the other hand, I can have many such configurations because there is always this confusion whether I put a down arrow or an up arrow, which will give me the same number of non-zero total cost. Okay, so there is this degeneracy, as we call it, and so there are a lot of states which are possible with this kind of frustrated conditions. Okay, so this frustration is happening in nature because you have systems which have particles which are of different sizes or different shapes. Okay. So for example, you have pebbles which are of different shapes, and then in such situations, you are asking the questions, how can I fill up space if I have particles of different sizes or particles of different shapes and so on, okay? So now we'll do some thought experiment. So here, what we'll do is that I have the same point pattern which I have thrown into space, okay? There are 3 boxes, and so I've thrown random points in a box, and I pay a price if 2 points are too close, okay? How close? I have to define the threshold, and that defines constraints in mathematical language, and then I try to minimize that cost and try to find solutions which satisfy these constraints and so on. So let me play those videos. So what you will see is that the 3 boxes will give me 3 different solutions, okay? So you have an ordered solution which has this triangular point pattern repeated in space, and then you have distortions that are happening in the other two boxes. And the reason is that I have put different constraints in the different boxes. So in one case, I have all the disks of same sizes. So two disks are, all the disks have the same distance between each of them. On the other hand, I have here put two disks which are of different sizes. So the distances, the constraints that I'm putting locally are different, and therefore the minimum solution, the energy solution that I get, or the minimum price that I get, has different conformation than corresponding to what I have over here. And in this case, what I have is what we call polydisperse, in the sense that you have disks of all different shapes and sizes drawn from some distribution and so on. Okay, so what is the answer? Or what is the conclusion from this? That even if I start from the same initial condition, then even if I start from the same point pattern, I will get different solutions depending upon the constraints that I put. And if I have different size mixtures, then I will never get an ordered structure. I will always get a disordered structure, and so on. Okay? And why are these interesting? These are interesting in the context of what we call random close packing problems, where you have a box and you are given steel balls, and you have to find out or figure out how many number of steel balls that you can put into the box such that you have what we call a random structure, that is not an ordered structure. And this is a very old problem that this guy, J.D. Bernal, was trying to solve in the 1950s and 1960s. And he was trying to figure out what is the densest configuration of a liquid state that he can think of. And that is what he called random close packing. And he was trying to construct by hand or doing some experiment with steel balls to figure out what is the best packing that he could do with these steel balls and so on. And this problem we can now solve mathematically, with computers and so on. And these are computer-generated images where we have tried to find, or researchers have tried to find, how to find the best packing consisting of different kinds of spheres, different sizes of spheres, different shapes, mixtures of different shapes, and so on. Okay? So this packing problem is a very interesting problem, which a lot of people are working on across the world. And then even experiments one can do. So these are what we call GEMS in India or MEMS in US, and they have tried to find what is the best packing that this kind of spheroids can have. And it turned out that these structures have more density or packing fraction compared to the spheres and so on. So that was an interesting finding, that if you have spheres or in contrast to spheroids, then these spheroids have much better packing than compared to these spheres and so on. So why are we interested in this kind of packing problems? The reason is that, and there is this hypothesis that was made sometime in late 1990s, that actually the whole class of materials have similar kind of structures. This kind of what we call glasses, what we call jammed systems or very packed systems. All of these have very similar structures in this they are very dense systems with this very random close packing kind of structures. And I can obtain this kind of disordered structures or disordered solids either via densification, that I can pack more and more material into a closed space, or I can lower the temperature and can obtain a glass, which is the window glass that you see and so on. Okay? So this is an unified perspective. And let's say in the last 20 or 30 years, so this was a hypothesis, okay? And we have made great progress in this field in sort of trying to figure out what are the similarities or dissimilarities that one encounters as we try to make this kind of disordered solid structures, either via lowering the temperature or increasing the packing fraction and so on. Okay. And as of now, we know a whole variety of materials which fall into this category of disordered solids. So it can start from very metallic systems like metallic glasses and so on, polymer glasses, colloidal gels, and these are materials that we're using in our daily life. And that's what it makes it very exciting for industrial applications and also for the engineering perspective. So you have, you can make, I'll come to more examples later on. So you have colloidal gels, then you have foams and emulsions, then you can go on to the granular scales. So you have systems whose constituents range from nanometers, which are very small, atomic scales, to which are 1 centimeter. So for example, you have steel balls, and you can make a pile of them, and that can be also a disordered solid and so on. Okay? So then the other feature of disordered solids is something that I would like to illustrate to you again. So again, we are doing the packing problem, and we start with different initial conditions. So now I have 3 different random point patterns in space, and I'm again trying to minimize the cost, similar to what we did earlier. And then we'll try to ask what are the solutions that we get. So you will see that this is the case where I have disks of all similar sizes. Everybody will go to a similar solution, that you have ordered structures with these local triangular motifs, irrespective of which initial condition I started out from. Okay? So these are the final structures that I get. So all of these have these triangular motifs, and you have, so with some rotation, I mean, you can do a global rotation to go from one structure to the other, but independent of which initial condition you started from, you always land up in this kind of ordered state. On the other hand, if you take the same random point patterns, and then you try to fill up space with mixtures, then what you will get is that you will land up in different final states. Or in other words, what it gives us is that, if you have mixtures, then there is no unique final destination for the solution. On the other hand, you will have a multiplicity of final states with similar energies and so on. And so these are the final structures that one gets if one does this minimization process and so on. And you can see that these are very different motifs compared to what we got for the uniformly sized disks. So this, I mean, I can generate, you can give me infinite number of initial conditions, and I can generate to you infinite number of such final states and so on. So this gives us, or has given us this perspective that if I think of this as houses, where this kind of people are seated in this kind of patterns, each of these houses are sitting in some, I have this huge mountain range, and I have these houses which are seated in some of the valleys in these mountains and so on. Okay? So essentially, I have a huge landscape of these states where all these minimized energy states, or the minimum energy, cost states, are sitting in the valleys inside this mountainous range. And my task is to find out how many such states are possible. That is one task. And also to find the pathways between one state and another state and so on. So this is a cartoon that we can draw. So you have a very rough landscape, and where the different final solutions are sitting over this in this landscape and so on. So in one sense, one is an explorer in the sense that one is trying to find, or one is doing an exploration of the topography of this landscape or the mountainous ranges. And you can understand that sometimes it may be very difficult to go from one valley to another valley just by walking across these mountainous ranges and so on. Okay, and we will see what are the consequences of that. Okay, so what are the questions that one is interested in? So how do these materials form in nature? How to develop new materials? And then what are the physical mechanisms at play? And therefore, from a material science perspective, you want to work with the actual materials, like, for example, silicon, oxygen, copper, zirconium, and so on. From a physicist perspective, we try to work with very simple models. And for example, we want to develop new algorithms. For example, the current generation of algorithms cannot take us to the most low-down valleys in the mountainous ranges, okay? We can only go to the high-lying valleys in the mountainous ranges, and we'd really like to go down to the lower valleys and see what are the lower valleys looking like. So we would like to charter out the topography of this mountainous range, and at the moment, we are not able to do so. Sorry? So that we don't know yet. So there is a conjecture of an ideal glass, but we don't know what an ideal glass looks like. Okay. So then we also would like to explore new phenomena and so on. So there are different ways to tackle the problem. Some people like to do it with pen and paper, but in this domain, it's very difficult to make progress with pen and paper. So most of the work is done computationally, and that's what we also do at Math Science. And of course, there are a lot of experiments, and there is a talk between the different communities to understand or make progress. So what I'll now focus on is basically the mechanical aspects of this disordered solids, because any solid will break. I mean, irrespective of whichever solid you take, it will break. The question is how much force you need to put. A chalk will break easily. This might take a little more effort. A metallic rod will take much more effort and so on. But everybody has to fail at some point. And we would like to understand how this failure process happens. Okay? So this is a typical engineering diagram. So for example, on this axis is how much load I'm putting, and on this axis how much deformation it is undergoing, and so on. And so there is this linear branch, which is called the elastic branch, and you know the elasticity. So for example, if you take a rubber band and then you release it, it will go back to its initial state. So this is sort of the reversible path. And from the slope of this, I can tell you how hard or soft a material is. So if the slope is very large, then it is very hard. If it is very low, then it is a soft material, and so on. And I'll give you examples of that. So at some point, the load increases, and then at some point, the material fractures or fails or whichever. Okay? So we would like to know how this failure process happens and at how much deformation a material can withstand or how much load a material can withstand before it fails. So there are different kinds of materials out there in the world. So for example, these are all hard amorphous materials, so hard solids. So for example, the glasses that we know, volcanic rock, then the Gorilla Glass on the mobile phone. These are, of course, obsolete now. And then also, those of you who are interested in gravitational waves, the LIGO detectors, or the gravitational wave detectors, have the best mirrors in the world. And so you have to make the best glass in the world to on these mirrors and so on, and that is a challenge. And that is what many groups are working on, to make the best glass in the world, which will go on to the next generation of detectors, which should come up in 2025, 2026. Okay? The reason being that a glass, there's always dissipation, that some energy is always lost for an incoming information, and we have to decrease the amount of dissipation that can happen, and that is a very big challenge industrially and technologically. Okay. So then a side remark. So of course, if you increase the temperature of this material, it will melt. So this is volcanic rock, which is melting, which is lava. And then, of course, this is the silica glass, the window glass, which is being shaped to any kind of this very nice glass vessels that we see in our daily life and so on. And I have put here the different glass transition temperatures, or the melting temperatures, or freezing temperatures. So for oxide glasses, which are these kind of glasses, so the ones that we use at home, this is about 1,000 to 1,400 degrees Celsius, which is much higher than whatever our room temperature is. And metallic glasses are also very high temperatures. Polymer glasses are also some glasses that we use. For example, many seats and et cetera are made out of the polymer glasses. And these are sort of like nearby room temperature or visible temperature and so on. Okay? So the interesting thing, for example, here that you can see is that the glass is molten, but you can still shape it. Okay? Unlike water or ice, once it is melting, you can't shape it. Okay? So these kind of materials, there is a temperature window at which it is molten, but still it has the elasticity which allows you to shape these materials, which is the most interesting part of these substances. Okay. Okay. So, and then there is this new class of materials which are called metallic glasses. Metallic glasses are amazing materials which have been, and advanced technological countries have made great progress in making metallic glasses and so on. Unfortunately, the development in India is still delayed. So metallic glasses have huge endurance strength. Okay? So like megapascals and so on. Okay, unfortunately, they're also very brittle. That means the moment you reach that amount of loading, it will break very easily and so on. Okay, but you can make all kinds of things. So from very nanoscale devices and so on, and to like baseball bats or telephones, and even now they're sending rovers with this metallic glass parts and so on. So it's a very durable material, and there's a lot of interest in how to develop this material. And also, since it's breaking so easily, we need to figure out how to make it more. So since it can withstand a lot of load, then we would also like to make it more fracture-free in some sense. And therefore, a challenge is to make it more what we call ductile and so on. So I'll come to what is ductility and so on. So these are what we call hard materials. And then there's a whole class of materials which are soft materials. And these are materials that we use in everyday life. So all these are disordered solids. And why do we call it a solid? Of course, in the previous case, it was evident to you that it was a solid because these are solid objects that you know of. But these are all solids because they have their shape till the moment it flows. Okay? So for example, a dollop of ice cream will retain its shape unless it melts. Ketchup, mayonnaise, it will retain its shape unless it flows. I mean, you do something to it. Okay? Same thing for the so for the sandcastle, the food that we eat, and so on. So all these are disordered solids, and which are of interest to us for various reasons, and so on. Okay. So the other thing is that all of these materials require some loading or what should we call stress to make it flow. So ketchup, you really need to shake and make it flow. Or mayonnaise also, you really need to shake and make it flow. And also, the biscuit or cake will not, break. If you put a little bit of bite, you need to put sufficient amount of bite to make it eatable and so on, okay? So all of them have a certain amount of yielding threshold, and that is a characteristic of all these solids and so on. And when it flows, it also flows very slowly. So there is this very interesting experiment that is happening in Australia. So this is tar, which is dropping out of this glass vessel. I don't know whether you can see that or not. And there is a record of, I don't know, is it readable? How frequently the drop of tar is flowing. And the experiment started in 1922, and now it's 2024, and we are waiting for the 10th drop to drop. Okay? And the person who started the experiment passed away 2 years back. Okay? So there is a website, the 10th watch or something like that. So it's live, you can watch it. And well, there's no fun because unless it drops, there is no fun. Okay, so you can understand how sluggish the flow is. And so this sluggish flow you have observed elsewhere also. I mean, mayonnaise is also very sluggish. Okay? And so in some materials what we saw is like, so for example, the glass that we use, it shatters, right? So the moment it breaks, it shatters. In this case, it doesn't fracture like that, but it flows. So that's the difference between these two materials, that in one case it fractures, the other case it flows. And so we'd like a fracturable material to flow, so that is a challenge. And on the other hand, in some cases, in these cases, we might need it to fracture or break in a certain way and so on. So these are challenges that one has to okay. So I don't know how much time I have. Okay, maybe. So this is one, I have no idea whether these are playing or not. Can we get that later on? Okay, so this is a granular flow, and it is flowing, and it is very intermittent, so there is a lot of jerky motion that is happening over here, and at some point, it will stop flowing. And these are the rings, these are the balls that you should keep an eye on. They will come and prevent the flow at a later point. And here you can see that in the tube, if there is water, it flows. If you press it, on the other hand, if it is toothpaste, it will not flow so easily, okay? So it will form, it will retain its solid shape till the point it breaks. So he has the toothpaste, and then you need to put some effort to make it flow. And this you have experienced, okay? I'll go ahead, okay? But this is experience that you have, so it takes a lot of effort to make the toothpaste to flow. Okay, so then there are also catastrophic events like avalanches. So there is this skier who will start, and then because of the skier, there will be an avalanche, okay? And so that person has still not started, now started. And then the avalanche starts. So just this small perturbation, if you think in the context of the huge mountains, the small perturbation generates this avalanche kind of disaster. Okay, there can be more disaster situations which I have not shown. So this is another disaster situation. Here there is a landslide that is happening, and then the whole thing just breaks. Okay. So these are all amorphous solids which are breaking. Okay, solid ice, and then there is landscape which is breaking apart. So the questions that we are confronted with, how failure starts. So we would like to understand this from a very microscopic perspective. So from the perspective of these red and blue spheres, So if we were to model materials with these red and blue spheres, we would like to understand how failure starts from this scale and goes up to this scale. Okay? So that is what we call a multi-scale problem, because you have to go through different descriptions at different scales. So first you will describe physics, which is at the scale of these particles, then maybe a group of such particles and hierarchy of scales and so on. So then we'd like to identify what are weak spots, which may be the source of failure. So that is a challenge. So in the crystal, we know what are the weak spots because there are defects and so on. In these materials, we don't know what are weak spots, and this is a question that we would like to answer. Then will we be able to predict failure? So if we can predict failure, then, for example, we can tell you when a bridge will break or something like that. I mean, or a material will break and so on. And then in the context of that failure, we would like to know what are the precursors. So suppose there is some signal that so for example, like in earthquake, so you have sensors. So in a bridge, you can put sensors. Then you can, if there are signatures, so you can measure some time series, and then you can ask, are there signatures to failure or precursors to failure that you can identify? And we can also do in experiments. We can, for example, in the toothpaste case, I can ask, what are the precursors before it will break or flow or whatever it is, okay? So then in some cases, we would like to prevent yielding or failure. So we are to strengthen material so that it doesn't fail. Or in some cases, we want to facilitate yielding. Because you don't want a very, tough chocolate. You want a chocolate that will just break when you bite it. So in that context, you are facilitating yielding. Okay? So then, in that context, we would like to design and functionalize materials, new materials, which will have the exact functionalities that we would like to work with. And this we want to do with very simple model systems, which a lot of researchers are working on. So then, so far, we were in the inanimate world, so to speak, and then we want to venture into the biological world. And so we have a lot of experience already, although we don't understand to the greatest degree how failure happens in this kind of amorphous disordered solids. Maybe we can export whatever we know to the biological world. Maybe that is relevant there. And then also, maybe there are new complexities that we are encountered with, which we will not be able to tackle. So let's see how it goes. So two examples that immediately come to mind are crowded streets, very dense crowd, nothing is moving. Okay? And it's very disordered, of course. Okay? And these are very situations that we live with around us. And this is within a cell, what we call macromolecular crowding. So you have, in a very small space, a lot of molecules which are compacted together, and you'd like to know how this compactification is happening and what are the consequences of that. For example, if in the context of some disease or something like that. Okay? And these are things that people study and so on. So there are a lot of materials where people have realized that there are these kind of soft disordered solids that are existing, like different, so wings, cellular layers, ant colonies, bacteria, and so on. I'll show some pictures of ant colonies also. Okay. So here, this is the development of a wing, of an insect wing, on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side is soap bubbles. Okay? And what I would like to convince you is whatever is happening in the soap bubble is very similar to what is happening inside this development process in the wing. Okay? So if you look very closely, there are some flows that are happening here. And if I play this movie, so whatever flows that are happening over here are also flows that are happening over here. The difference is that this is an inanimate object. Here, it's a living system where there are a lot of intrinsic noises that are there at play. And so what we'd like to do is we understand the physics here, and then we want to port the physics from here to understand the development process over here. And that's what many people have started. So for example, there are certain things called vertex models which describe the physics over here, which have been used in the development, study to understand the development process in this wing formation and so on. So next thing, so for example, here is an so recently I was in some meeting with where now there are a lot of mechanical tests that are happening on cellular systems and so on. And they would like to bridge with people who have knowledge about mechanics of disordered systems. So for example, you have a stretching of a cellular film, and you'd like to know when does it snap. So or in other words, you would like to know how much load it can withstand, or how does the failure happen. in a wound, for example. That's a fracture that is happening, and you have to know how much load it can withstand and so on. And this is again what we call the cavitation problem, so where you have a cavity that is forming inside a cellular assembly. And these are the things that we do. I mean, so for example, in the inanimate world, we know how cavitation process happens. And now, except that now this is an active or biological material where the same process is happening. So we have to now understand this cavitation process in this kind of biological scenario and so on. Okay, so now this is a traffic jam of sheep, and the dog is trying to break it. Okay, so eventually it does, and the sheep can move. So this is very similar to what we have seen in granular jamming. So there is a arch, and the arch is broken by the dog. Okay, so of course then people have been looking at ants, colonies of ants, and this is a very dense collection of ants. And here, as Sumana had shown, there we know the transport processes happen, and here. So this is a very classic experiment, those who know in fluids. So what is called Stokes flow, for example. So you have a fluid flowing around the obstacle. So here the fluid is replaced by a active material or active fluid or active solid, which is this ant colony and so on. And so people would like to understand how the ants are facilitating the movement of this material through the colony and so on. Okay. So I'm almost finished. So this is a penguin colony, okay? And it's very jammed, and this is winter, and they want to keep warm, okay? How do they keep warm? So there are waves that go in through this penguin colony, and by these waves, penguins are actually rotating through inside the colony. Those who are inside will go outside. So those who are warm will go to the cold area. The cold penguins will go to the warm area, and so on. So they have naturally figured out how to keep warm by being jammed, but also to distribute the temperature by going through this kind of collective motions within the colony and so on. And this is some recent paper. It's about less than a week old. So where they have looked at some crowd in Spain, and I think some, maybe a music festival, and there they see. Mardi Gras. No, it's not Mardi Gras. Basically I don't know whether we can play it again. So what they see, that this is a very densely packed crowd, and you can see these huge oscillations that are happening, collective oscillations that are happening by individuals there who are doing their own things and so on. Okay, and they also try to understand. So they looked at this in the context of some stampede that happened in a carnival or maybe a music festival in Germany, but this is in Spain. And basically, if this kind of patterns are happening, it's possible that avalanches can also happen if somebody falls or some group, there's some mishap somewhere, and that can generate stampedes and so on. So we would like to understand how this crowding problem can be, or the stampede problem can be controlled in this kind of huge, dense assemblies and so on. So, and then people have also put in sensors in this kind of assemblies and looked at this kind of time series. So people are jumping on the ground, and what do these time series look like? And these time series look very much like, so this is some song of, I think, Taylor Swift, and this is 3 nights of Taylor Swift music, and it is giving almost the same signal. Okay, the people jumping up and down in the ground. Okay, and this signal is very much similar to an earthquake signal. Okay, so. And they have also tried to measure what is the seismic, so it's like, I forget. In seismic scale, it's 2 or something like that. It's not like a huge, 3 or, it's not a huge earthquake, but it has a measurable seismic signal and so on. Okay. So there are challenges to modeling and analysis because there is some intrinsic or active noise, as we call it, and we don't know how to model it, so we just put in some ad hoc things. So for example, this is an example of where the cells are sort of changing their shape and size, and that is how some biological process happens. So how to incorporate that in our modeling, and how to reproduce the phenomenology that is seen in the biological materials and so on. And this is, for example, simulations that one can do. So these are like some disks which are what we call active. And then what you will see that suddenly there are some events that are happening which are like So this kind of avalanche kind of events can happen. So very simple models where you can incorporate some of the physics, and then you will get signatures that are very much visible in the biological world and so on. So to conclude, I have shown you that there is a diversity of complex and disordered materials. There are a lot of questions to explore, and it's a very interdisciplinary research. So engineers, biologists, physicists, chemists, a lot of people are involved. And it's a huge and exciting community, and I hope a lot of more youngsters will join in this pursuit. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinaki.